Ahoy, mateys! Welcome everyone to Captain Keaton. I'm joined today by a wonderful guest here. This is Alex of Turbozone.
Hey everyone, BioPhoenix here. I'm just kidding. I'm not BioPhoenix. I'm Alex of Turbozone.
Hey, what's up, Alex of Turbozone? Welcome to the channel.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
I would say this is your first appearance, but you actually made a guest appearance in the Legend of Zelda NES retrospective video.
Let's see if the audience can find it. They can find me.
Find me in the video. Well, this is your first interview, and I wanted to get you for a Zelda game that matters to you, and I know that you happen to be a fan of Zelda 2, whereas many are not, and you didn't exactly grow up when it was around, but look at that. You have the magnificent gold cartridge. Well done.
Very shiny. It's like hard to show on the camera because it's like reflecting everywhere.
I think it makes it better to show on the camera.
Yeah, I mean it's a important game to me, so I'm glad I'm here to talk about it with you today.
Well, before we get started, why don't you go ahead and tell the viewers what's going on over on your channel Turbozone, as well as any other projects that you have going on.
Absolutely. Hey everybody, I'm Alex from Turbozone. Do you like Atari games and rambling and video games in general? That's sort of just what I do over on Turbozone. I make content. I used to do a lot of reviews. I don't really do that many reviews now, but I like to do content where I kind of talk about Atari, Sega, Nintendo, PlayStation, Xbox, whatever I want to talk about. And I also have a little podcast over there called Hey Geeks and Gamers, where I bring guests on and we talk about random things like food and the news and who knows, So it's just a fun time over there. I've been having a lot of fun this year making projects.
Yeah, you got a nice variety of well-done content. I like the themes, and yeah, you're a big Atari and Sega fan, so gives you a little flavor.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting today, talking about something that isn't related to any of that. And of course, I'm also part of the Button Mappers, so if you go into the Button Mappers podcast, I am there.
Look at that, a podcast channel. Well done.
Yeah.
I noticed your Zelda tunic.
Yeah, I'm Link. Yeah.
What's the story with that?
I don't remember where I got this, dude. I think I got it for Christmas or something. But I have this. It's just a random Zelda themed shirt, and I don't wear it because I like wearing graphic tees and stuff. Like I wear like a black t-shirt with stuff on it, or like white t-shirts. But this is too much just for like going out in public. So like I've had this dang thing, and it's just been sitting in my closet. And I was like gonna do this interview, and I was like, wait a second, I have that tunic somewhere. And I do actually have a Master Sword around here somewhere, so I could like go half Link cosplay right now, but I don't know where that Master Sword is.
Well, if you ever get a job in a restaurant serving dinners, I want you to serve my order in that tunic.
Yeah, and I'll butter your bread with the Master Sword too.
There we go.
Can I get a little bit of butter? Can I get a little bit of butter on this bread? Sure. Hi.
Whoa! Look at that service. Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and get this interview underway. So, since this is your first time on the channel, I want to ask, what was your first exposure to the Legend of Zelda series, and what was it like?
Oh, so this is weird to frame it this way because it's not a game I enjoy. But the first time I ever encountered Zelda was as a kid. I grew up with an N64, and I had friends and family that also had it. My cousin also had an N64, so a lot of times I would go over to his house and play games with him. We played a lot of like Perfect Dark and stuff, Mario Kart, whatever. And I remember one day I went over and we were gonna play something else, but when I walked in to his room, he was playing Ocarina of Time. And it was the first time I had ever seen a Zelda game before. And He was like, "Here you go, play with it while I go to the bathroom," and I just kind of like rode Link around on the horse and jumped over some stuff. Um, but yeah, that was my first really exposure to Zelda. But the first time actually playing a Zelda game was shortly after that. I got a copy of Link to the Past for Super Nintendo, which I had a Super Nintendo. So that's sort of where I got into Zelda. I liked that game as a kid, and then from there I would go on to. I mostly skipped the 64 games and I went straight to GameCube. So that kind of ties into this game today. Um, and it's really interesting because I went from Link to the Past straight into Wind Waker, which they're both really important games to me. Um, and yeah, if you know anything about me, you know that I'm not crazy about Ocarina of Time, and I think this is partially to blame, the fact that I was not, I didn't grow up with the game. So, um, yeah, I'm a Zelda fan, but I often fight with other Zelda fans.
As most Zelda fans do. There's a lot of infighting in this community, sadly. I hope to make a video on
Sure.
it someday. Um, but I think at the end of the day, like all Zelda games are great and they're all important in their own right. And I'm glad that you had positive experiences with several entries in the series. And I'd love to have you back for Link to the Past, especially since that's the one you grew up with. We can get more into the Zelda 2. So you had an interesting start, kind of like N64 backwards to Super Nintendo, forwards to GameCube. So when did Zelda 2 and the NES titles come in the picture?
So, I grew up in a time when the internet was a little baby. The idea of online content was still fresh and brand new. And the GameCube, PS2, Xbox era was still greatly into effect. We were about to enter like the Wii era. But going online, you'd watch uh, gaming content, and it was like the earliest form of gaming content, which was mainly like people yelling about video games or being like, "Hey, did you know that video games exist?" Like that was sort of like early content, as compared to now, where it's like, "How many times can I roll in Zelda, until I beat Ganon?" Like, but back then it was like, "Did you know that Zelda 2 even existed?" So there was kind of like this discourse around Zelda 2 back then of being the weird one, being the one that like it's the hard, weird one that everybody doesn't like or something. Um, and at the time, I played a lot of GameCube, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess. Those are the ones that I really, played a lot of. I had a friend that had the what's it called, like the collection thing, the Master
Anniversary collection,
Collection,
Master
or
Sword
you,
collection, something.
whatever it is, whatever that thing is. He had a copy of that, and of course, he played Ocarina and Majora on it. But what interested me was the fact that it had Zelda 1 and especially 2 on it. Because I had never seen those games before. I didn't even own NES games. I didn't play an NES. I didn't know, so like that was really kind of where I got to look at these games that I've only heard about through the internet, through people online, kind of saying like, "Oh, it's the bad one." I was like, "Huh." I was like, "Well, it's like people say it's hard, and I really want to, I like the challenge myself." So I was like, "Okay, I'll try Zelda 2 on his disc." And there was a stint for a while there where I would go over to his house and he would just watch me play Zelda 2 because he never actually played it. He only played the 3D games. So he would just watch me play Zelda 2. So I would go over to his house to commandeer his GameCube and play Zelda 2. And that's sort of where my love for the game really started because like I hadn't played a lot of like a lot of 8-bit games especially, but uh, a lot of older games that had as much depth as that game. Um and yeah, it was a game that I just set out to really want to play, and I got to play it. I was excited.
That's awesome. Did you play this before Zelda 1? After?
Before actually. I've actually I appreciate Zelda 1 now. I actually had a weird aversion to it for a while. I think it's because I grew up with Link to the Past that it's like after playing Link to the Past and then going to Zelda 1, you're kind of like, ew. like this isn't Link to the Past, you know? It's kind of it's like the game's naked almost. So like it took me a while to really get around to appreciating the first Zelda. Um just because it is a very simple looking and playing game compared to Link to the Past. Um, so Yeah, Zelda 2 is mainly where I kind of stuck at that time. It was the one that really interested me.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. Uh, for several reasons. One is like I think like your timeline is like very like
It's, oh,
unique.
my timeline makes more sense than the damn Zelda timeline. I'll tell you that much.
That's true. It has a logic, and not illogic. A logic. So I was curious about this negative stigma, like the birth of it. Like, did it begin like back in the internet era? I did some research, and a lot of the reception for this game was largely positive back in the day. So, do you remember any specific instances or examples of people talking poorly about the game?
Yeah, I think it was because obviously back in the day, which is so funny, if you go back and read a lot of old EGM or like whatever magazines you're gonna, of course, Nintendo Power kind of, they're kind of skewed, but especially like magazines like EGM, a lot of the reviews back then, sometimes they just don't reflect how the game stood up over time, like its legacy. And we see that kind of all the time with Zelda, especially. I think back to Wind Waker. People hated Wind Waker when that game came out. People love that game now. So I think it was sort of the opposite effect. I think back then people had a great appreciation for Zelda 2 because it was a new big adventure game on NES. Um, but then after Zelda abandoned that formula, people kind of just started seeing it as the weird one. Like, don't play that one. That's the weird one. That's not Zelda. And the online discourse around that time sort of reflected that. I was growing up. I was big into watching game trailers and Screw Attack. Both those websites, they hosted like original content, and Screw Attack hosted like the Angry Video Game Nerd and a few other people. And I would watch different shows, and oftentimes in those videos, Zelda 2 was brought up as a bad game or a hard game. So or it's bad because it's hard, or it's bad because it's weird and it's different and it's changed. So there's sort of this vibe going around like at that time that like Zelda 2 shouldn't count as a Zelda game. Like
Mm.
Link to the Past is the real Zelda 2. So that was sort of the gist around that time, I think.
Okay, interesting. I didn't used to watch AVGN. I did go back and watch a Zelda 2 video for the sake of this. And while his video is pretty objective, I'd say, and even in the end he kind of just like hugs the corner and stabs Shadow Link no problem, like while not even looking. You can't beat this game, classic AVGN. In the description, he labels it as like the failure or something akin to that. So like that is the marketing for the title. So I do think you're right when it comes to the evolution of the series and where it places this game, kind of being responsible for its perception over time. When
Yeah.
you played it, how did you feel about the game versus how do you feel about it now?
Oh, okay. When I first played it, um, again, it was okay. So this is a hard time to remember, but there was once a period of time where Nintendo didn't bank on like nostalgia all the time. They didn't really reprint a lot of NES games, or there really wasn't an easy way to play a lot of them back then, especially during the GameCube era. Like you could play something on like Animal Crossing, and I think they had a few for like Game Boy Advance come out, but like there wasn't like a virtual console like the Wii had, which was exciting when the Wii came out. So getting to go back and play a lot of these older games was very intriguing, and I had a fascination with retro games growing up. And I couldn't go out and just buy a copy of Zelda 2 at Walmart or something. But nobody was carrying Zelda 2 anywhere. So getting to play it on the GameCube was pretty cool at the time. Getting to see like what they could do with the NES hardware, like the visuals they could create and the music, and just the feeling that game made me feel was very cool, and um, stuck with me. I think a lot of NES games around that time that I experienced did, like I played a lot of the Mega Mans for the first time around there on like the Anniversary Collection. I played like the first Metroid for the first time. So there's like a lot of NES games that like I still love today that I got to experience then and really appreciate. Um, Back before every Nintendo handheld and console had a way to play all the NES games over and over and over. As a now, Zelda 2 is one of my favorite NES games. I think it's incredibly important for the history of games in general. Um, I think that stigma that was around back then is gone. I don't think people view it in the same way. I think there's more appreciation for it. Because, gaming as a hobby, like, is just bigger. It's gotten bigger like every year, so people kind of, go back and appreciate games in different ways. And it's a game that I can still sit down and pop into my, let's call it NES. I put it in my Retron, but let's say NES, and play it in like a darkly lit room, and still kind of get like immersed into the adventure, you know, and it kind of also skewed my taste in NES games. One of my other favorite NES games, Faxanadu, is very much Zelda 2. They basically took Zelda 2 and said, okay, well let's do our own version with our own improvements. And yeah, it's just a fascination for me was like these like sprawling 2D adventure games. Yeah, I still have that, I think. Um, so yeah.
That was an interesting time, I think, in the GameCube era because, there was like very limited revival or appreciation for a lot of classics. I guess you did have like the Game Boy Advance cartridges and so like or even Animal Crossing with the unlockable NES games. So any appreciation you got for older games was appreciated. And I think with that it must have been called Collector's Edition. With the Collector's Edition, playing Zelda 2 must have been special. Did you find it too difficult back in the day, or were you able to beat it?
I think younger me. I honestly think me because like this is like I'm thinking how old I would have been around this time, like middle school. So like middle school me, I think was able to handle games better than me now, honestly, because like back then I was sort of a masochist when it came to like difficulty. I like to prove myself. So I like to play a lot of games like Mega Man, like the original Metroid, like even like the modern games of that time. I was really into like Devil May Cry 3. I remember like playing Devil May Cry 3 on like one of the highest difficulties and trying to get through it and bragging to my friends that I did it. Like it was just kind of like it was like a rite of passage. So I never found the game to be too difficult back then. I found it to be hard, definitely, but impossible, no. It was a game that it just asked a little more of your time and understanding than a lot of other games, um, and I find that refreshing.
Nowadays, you don't enjoy that as much. Does that affect your opinion of it now?
No, I do. I do. I just think as I've gotten older, I'm just worse at games than I was. Of course, I don't play them as often. Like I have responsibilities. Like back then, other than school, like yeah, I can hammer away at games all day. But I think now it's just I don't have the time to like dedicate to a single game like that for that long. Um, but I still appreciate difficulty. So even now, even playing it on my 3DS, I was prepping for this. I was playing some on my 3DS. I still don't think it's as hard as people let on.
How did it go playing on your 3DS?
It was fine. I mean, um, I had multiple ways I could have played this cartridge, but like I have to work and stuff, so like it's easier to have my 3DS on me, and I have that stupid little Game and Watch, but I'm not playing this on. I can imagine beating this on that Game and Watch. Could you imagine beating Zelda 2 on that damn Gaming Watch, the Game and Watch thing? No, no. But 3DS is fine. I have the 2DS XL. And it has a decent D-pad and stuff, and I bought like a little grip for mine, so it's nice to play it that way. But you know, it is fine to play it that way. There is that temptation though to like use the save states. It's like, oh well, I fucked up this temple, might as well restart from the beginning of the temple. Oops, save state. So like that is there, So it probably isn't the most pure way to play the game, but it's still a fine method.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, listen, you could still use that method, like that, whatever hardware you use, and just be deliberate, or there's a word for this. It's not diligence, it's something else, like, or discipline. You need the discipline to not click on a save state icon for 7 hours of playtime, and that can be tough sometimes. And I don't fault anyone for doing it. I did it the first time I played. But if that matters to you, you could always do that later. You've done it before, so like, it's possible. You said this game had a huge historical impact. Have you seen that within the series at all?
Within the series, probably not until maybe the 3D era. I think maybe some of the 3D games might have taken some inspiration when it comes to like character designs and like enemy patterns. Maybe I more meant like the impact was more on the gaming as a whole. I think a lot of other games took Zelda 2 and ran with it, and it maybe worked in their favor, or sometimes it didn't. Castlevania 2 didn't, but sometimes it did. I think of like there's a whole what's that series on Super Nintendo, like ActRaiser? Like that's basically Zelda 2. That's basically Zelda 2, but as a series. So like there's a lot of games that kind of took Zelda 2's formula and ran with it, and people didn't say anything, but yeah, people didn't mind that.
ActRaiser's kind of niche too, but a lot of people who play it say like hail it as a cult classic. So
they love it. Yeah. They like praise that game.
Interesting. Maybe I should do some act raising. How do you compare this to the rest of the series then? I know you said it's one of your favorites, right? So like,
it's one of my favorites. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. This is about you.
It's hard. Okay, so like it's the cringiest damn thing to say, man. But it is the black sheep of the family. But like, is that really the game's fault? Like, it's not. There was only like at the time, like what existed beyond Zelda 2? Zelda 1. There was 2 games. There wasn't a whole formula yet, Like they could have done anything with the series at that point. But, I think it was just after the fact they went back to Link to the Past, and then they kind of went back to that style, and then they jumped to 3D, and that became its own style. The Zelda 2 style was never seen again. They've like implemented some touches of it. Like I think of like Link's Awakening, there's like some like slight 2D areas and stuff. Like some of those Game Boy games kind of had slight 2D stuff in it, but they never went back to this formula ever again. They never really went back to the RPG system ever again. The leveling up system in this game is very unique for Zelda. The only thing close that I could possibly think of is like Skyward Sword has a little bit of stuff with the items. Like you could do a little bit in that game, and that's the fucking Skyward Sword. Like they never touched this style again. So it is the black sheep of the family, but that's not the game's fault. that's Miyamoto's fault.
That's a Miyamoto moment.
Yeah, that's a Miyamoto moment. This formula had potential to grow, to do something with it. But I think with the success of A Link to the Past, and then fully realizing like the first Zelda's vision with that game, sort of, I think it kind of like they were like, well, what do we need Zelda 2 for? Throw it in the trash. We don't really need to go back to that. We have this.
Massive oversight, by the way, on their part.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole crowd of people now begging for something similar to Zelda 2, or something like this.
Dude, they bailed out on this right before the RPG era.
Yeah,
they screwed up.
Yeah. like maybe, I mean, what is it like this is what, 85? Yeah. Maybe this was just too early for the style, because again, come Super Nintendo, RPG. I mean, if you talk to people that like love Super Nintendo, they won't shut up about RPGs. Yeah, that's what they talk about. So.
Well, even then, it's only 2 spaces away from Zelda 1 in terms of top 10 NES sellers. by 2 million units. It's like 6.5 versus like 4.5. So they're both like high million sellers and in the top 10. So like I don't know. I do blame Miyamoto for this just for like rejecting the game, maybe because it's like not his baby in the same way that the first one was.
Yeah, that seems something he would do. But I was also thinking about this. Nintendo back then, they didn't really fall into a formula for their games until maybe Mario 3, I think, which that game had a huge success, obviously. But it seems like with their arcade games and with their NES games, it seems like every time they would do a new iteration, they would try to make a completely different game almost back then. And then with the success of like Mario 3, I think like that's when they were like, "Oh, people like the same stuff. So we should probably like hammer in formulas for these games." And so maybe that could have been part of it. Maybe that's why we've never seen Zelda 2 again.
Yeah, they stuck with the formula that was more strong, I guess.
Yeah.
So, well, hey, it's never too late. And Zelda's got a cult following now, so we can come back to this idea of the remake question, or we could just tackle it now. What do you think? Would you bring back Zelda 2 today? And if so, how?
Yeah, I would bring it back, but I know Nintendo isn't interested in doing that. Um, because it doesn't represent the brand they want for Zelda now. If they were to bring back any Zelda games, it would be the ones like it'd probably be like Link to the Past, honestly. They'd be like a Link to the Past remake or something. But so here's how I would handle it if I was Nintendo. Since they don't have an interest in it, clearly, I would hand it off to an indie developer. That's exactly what I would do. Because I think a lot of indie games, especially, take a lot of strong inspirations from Zelda 2. A bigger one for me, which it takes inspirations from a ton of NES games, but Zelda 2 is easy to spot in that game, is Shovel Knight. Like somebody like Yacht Club Games, they could do a fantastic job with the Zelda 2 remake. And it would be, and Nintendo's not shy from doing that. They had that like Cadence of Hyrule game that they handed off to the Cryptid and Echo Dancer guys, and that was successful and cool, and they didn't have to do anything. They just had to hand over the license basically. So that's what I would do if I were Nintendo. I would basically have another indie team, work on a Zelda 2 remake. It'd be, a new art style or something, whatever you want to do, fresh gameplay, but basically make it the NES game, but for a modern audience, and put it on the Switch eShop for 30-40 bucks, whatever you want to charge for it. And I think that would be very successful for them.
Yacht Club Games is terrific. I love Shovel Knight, and I think they would knock it out of the park. Are there any other developers that come to mind when you think of who could handle the Zelda 2 remake well?
It's tough. Way Forward, they've also drawn inspiration from Zelda 2 for some of their games. But one of the funnier ones is Adventure Time, Hey Ice King, Why'd You Steal Our Garbage? That's basically Zelda 2, but with Adventure Time characters. Like, they also clearly have a love for that game, and I think they did that Advance Wars remake for them recently. That like got canceled into oblivion, and then it finally came out. But yeah, so like they clearly have a relationship with them as well. So I think Way Forward would also do a pretty serviceable job. I would trust Yacht Club before them, but I would say Way Forward could do it.
And would you want to see this done? Like, what things would you want remade versus remastered?
Mm. I I think it should be a from the ground up remake, but I think it should be pretty um it should stick to the original formula of the game pretty closely, but just make improvements where there needs to be improvements. Like maybe make improvements with the towns. That's a big one, with the NPCs, like actually talking to the NPCs. Some of the NPCs you talk to in the first, in the Zelda 2, and they say bullshit. They say absolutely nothing to you. They say the dumbest shit to you. That's a big one. Make the town seem more important, make the objectives clearer. Whenever you talk to somebody. Um, and other than that, I mean, all you have to really do is just enhance the visuals. Maybe like whenever, like in my head, when I'm thinking of how this would look, I think, and this wouldn't be how they would do it, I don't think, but I think of that Wonder Boy 3 remake that looks really fucking pretty because it's like hand drawn. Like that would be a really cool style for this. And that's another thing too. Wonder Boy is also like greatly influenced. Like the whole Wonder Boy series is like greatly influenced by Zelda 2. That's basically Zelda 2, but on Sega consoles, and went on for a long time. So, um, they had recent success with remaking Wonder Boy 3. So, I would like to see maybe that style, but I don't know how they would do their art style. But a new fresh art style, coat of paint, fix up some small issues with the game, but keep it faithful overall. And I think you'd introduce this game to a whole new audience that would appreciate it.
As you're saying this, we're seeing footage of me basically getting cornered by an iron knuckle. Would you keep those combat sequences the same?
Yes. Here's what I would do. I would offer difficulties for the game. That's what I would do. But maybe keep the original difficulty and then maybe do like a more hand-holdy mode or something. So people can, maybe gamers that aren't as into difficult games can still enjoy their Zelda. Maybe call it whatever, assist mode or whatever. I'll call it baby mode, but make a baby mode. So if somebody like the Dark Knuckles don't kick your ass.
There we go. Okay, it's pretty obvious to me, but we can go into it. So let's do a little Zelda 1 versus Zelda 2. Where do you stand and why?
Zelda 2, but I appreciate Zelda 1. Don't get me wrong. I think Zelda 2 just does a lot of things that I appreciate more on the console. It's hard to pinpoint what my favorite NES game is, but if I had to put a game to it off the top of my head, and it's one that I always go to, it is the original Metroid, which is a very impactful game for me. Metroid is good at a few things. It's good at giving you a large world to navigate and actually giving you scale with your characters, which is something that I think Zelda 1 lacks because it is just kind of like a top down and it's kind of flat looking. Like I like the fact that it's a side view and you see like oh man, like here's Samus and here's this big monsters you gotta fight. That's kind of how I feel playing Zelda 2 as well. Also, the atmosphere in Zelda 2 is very unique. I couldn't tell you the difference in the dungeons in Zelda 1 to save my life, other than the shapes. Like one's a swastika, But and in Zelda 2 though, the different areas you go in have a very unique feeling. I think it's great because in Zelda 1, you basically had an overworld, and that's where you would fight. And yeah, the overworld had like different sections. And then you had the dungeons. And that's basically how the game worked. Overworld dungeons. In Zelda 2, not only do you have an overworld, which is a top-down view, you have random encounters, which you go to different environments. You have towns, you have temples, which also look very, unique. The temples don't really change that much, but they do change, kind of. You have just interesting looking areas. There's some optional areas that like you don't need to go to really, but you can, and they look cool. And it just kind of gives the sense of a bigger scale to me, I think, for the game than the original Zelda does. The original Zelda, you play through half the game and you've sort of already seen what the game looks like overall. You get to the same stupid looking fucking dragon, 3 heads, and you bomb them or whatever. But in Zelda 2, especially, you fight your way through a really tough temple area. You're going up and down the elevators, you're getting the keys, you're getting the items, and then you get to a boss, and the boss could completely surprise you with like what it is. And again, the bosses usually look bigger and stronger than Link, and you're like, oh man, how am I going to fight this thing? So I think it just does a better job overall with that aspect, and that's what I appreciate about it over Zelda 1.
I'm glad you brought up bosses now because I'm fighting that horse head right now, and it reminds me of like kind of just the theming for this game. I agree with you on the expansion element. Like it really does feel like an expanded thing. Like elements of it seem so much more developed. Even the scale of the world, while the first world is big and kind of like you get lost in it, I think like the scale of this one makes Link feel like a very small character in a huge world with two continents as well. When it comes to the combat sections, like it's a whole different ballpark. Like these are like gladiator duels to the death. Like when has Link ever been this badass? So I really do appreciate the combat in this game. While the sword can take a little bit of getting used to because of its reach, I do think that it takes a lot of skill, and that's nice and refreshing to see in this game.
Yeah, I have a aversion to some of the basic Nintendo tropes, especially Miyamoto, where in a lot of Nintendo games, you fight an enemy and it's like, hey, don't hit my big red weak point right here. That'd be bad. And like you especially see that in like 3D Zelda too, where it's like, hey, I'm gonna let you like get behind me for a second. No, you shouldn't slash me back there. Like it's very like choreographed, and that's something that Zelda 2 lacks highly. It's the combat does come down to skill instead of the horsehead guy being like, I'm gonna stop swinging my thing around, you better not hit me. Like a lot of other Zelda games do, especially when you go into the 3D era.
Oh my gosh, the one that I think of that's like the most challenging. I can't even like put the picture to it 'cause I guess I did this twice, but it's like stage 5 boss. He's like this like mace wielding dude or something. He's huge. You
Yeah, he
remember what
like
I'm talking about?
swings it around.
I don't
Yeah,
remember
he's hard to get
exactly,
close to.
but dude, figuring out the hitbox for him was crazy. Oh my gosh. If they
Yeah,
remade this
but
though, I
we should
would want that Thunderbird section to be a little cooler. I don't know. I feel like that one was lacking in this one.
I I and like the combat also is very unique for also actually using the shield for something.
Oh my gosh. And spells.
Yeah, and spells. Yeah, and that's very unique to this game is the idea of spells. Usually, Link just has the items he has in his fucking pockets, and he's like, I kind of make fun of some Zelda games because it's like Link will go to a dungeon and he'll be like, oh, I got a paperclip. I guess I use it here, and then that's about it. That's like really all you do with it. But in this game, you get the different spells, and they actually come in handy, and you can use them to really explore the world and do what you want to do in the game. And I think that's also a big point for this game over the first game. The first game had a broad sense of adventure, but you really couldn't do what you wanted to do in Zelda 1. You kind of needed to go in a certain order. In Zelda 2, like you do have an order. Yes, you do have things you have to do, like you have to go with the hammer to break the rock, whatever. But you can still adventure around and you gain something for it because the game's an RPG. Like whenever you're just playing the game helps you play the game. Like just running around the world will help you experience the game. And that's very unique for this title.
100%. It is now. It is difficult. Like, I mean, it's not to say it's impossible, but it's definitely challenging. So, in your experience, what are some tips and tricks that you would give to people who are trying to get into the game but maybe having a hard time?
It's time for the Turbo Zone tips and tricks. I'm Alex. I like Zelda 2, and I don't like Ocarina of Time. Zelda 2 tips and tricks is the first tip, the biggest tip I can give you is think of it as an RPG because that is what it is. Zelda 2 is, for all intents and purposes, an RPG. You can't run into it and expect to immediately get to the end of the game. You're gonna have to do some grinding. Um, there are random encounters. You can dodge the random encounters. That's something that's better than most RPGs. They actually show you the little characters on the map, and you can be like, "Oh, I don't feel like doing it right now." You can kind of escape it. But definitely, if you're trying to complete this game, you definitely want to do some grinding. Um, so get out there, stab some enemies. My favorite is I always get to the first temple that I grind the hell out of those bouncy skull balls that bounce around the rooms. Trust me, they will die. You got to stab them a million times, but they will die. And it's a good way to get your strength and health and magic up and get you on your way. So that's a big tip and trick. Um, Also, don't be afraid to use a guide. I know guides are a little in terms of like game like the gaming culture, like, oh man, you have to use a guide, you're not a real gamer. No man, this game was made for a guide. That's like how a lot of the NES games were. Zelda 1 was also made for a guide. They expected you to have something to play the game with, either the manual it came with, the a subscription to Nintendo Power, whatever it was. They expected you to have this stuff, because it was very baked into the NES economy at the time. So don't be afraid to go online and say like, "Hey, where the hell do I get the hammer to break the rock?" Because guess what? A lot of the times, kids back in the day looked at their Nintendo Power and said, "Hey, where the hell do I get the hammer to break the rock?" And Nintendo Power was like, "Yeah, right here." so, so don't be afraid to resort to that. Nobody's gonna judge you for it, or if they do judge you for it, fuck them.
On that point, I agree wholeheartedly. I think there is no shame in that game, in playing it that way. Specifically in this game, one of the things are not clearly explained in this era. Like what you're supposed to do or where you're supposed to go. And one of the ones that tricked me up in playing it was there's a random patch of grass that you have to walk into, and it's like one single square in order to find a guy in the woods who gives you a message to give to the raft dude in whatever town that is. There was nothing to indicate that you're supposed to explore random patches in order to find letters to give to dudes. Like, it's not clear at all. So, like, when it comes to the exploration, I do think that if you're getting, like, significantly, like, caught up, I recommend using a guide as well. I just think, like, use it when you need it. You could play it, like, strictly. Another guy that we know, the completionist, not the one that everybody else knows, but the real completionist.
The OG completionist, yeah.
I think he single-handedly plays games with guides, so like everybody has their own way to play a game. Play yours. Play your way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, here's the way I view guides. Whenever you pull out a board game for the first time, say you're playing Monopoly for the first time, do you open Monopoly and do you just take the instructions and you just fucking throw them away? No, you read it. You fucking read it because you need to know how to play the game, and that's how a lot of these older games work. You don't just go. You can't just jump into it. Games nowadays have guides in the game. You don't notice it a lot of the time, but a lot of times it's like even in like the newer Zeldas, it's like, hey, do you want to learn how to use your Sheikah slate? Like, hey, you want? Guess what? Back in the day, they couldn't do that on the NES. It was in these other formats. So,
100%. Let's go to the next question. Knowing how the game is perceived, knowing what it is, would you recommend Zelda 2 to newcomers? If so, what kind of newcomers?
yes, I would recommend Zelda 2 to newcomers. And that could be a controversial statement, but I think there is an audience for it, especially people that haven't played it, because there has been a resurgence of not only retro games, but hard retro games, tough games. Man, I'm trying to think of like Zelda 2. Like, I'm trying to think of games that are harder than Zelda 2, and one of the ones that comes to mind, which is also one of my favorite goddamn games, is Cuphead. Like, I recently played through Cuphead all the way, and that game that game's hard as shit. That game's hard, and people love that game. So if they can handle something like that, or or if the people that love, I mean, I love Dark Souls as well, but if you can play like the Souls games, you can easily play Zelda 2. It just takes a little bit of effort to learn the game, to learn your objectives. But no, I think there definitely is an audience for this title today, and I think a lot of them could be, are maybe scared off from the title because of the internet discourse that has surrounded it for so long. But there's this group of people now that you see a lot of new games come out that are just very hard, very very challenging, and people eat that stuff up now. So I think this could be, again, if Nintendo remade it, people would be like, oh, it's the Dark Souls of the Zelda series. That's what they'd be saying.
Dude, another Crab's Treasure is like they basically just marketed it that way exactly. Like,
yeah.
So I wouldn't put it past an indie dev to do that either if they were handed the reins for this. And people love that. The Souls-like. It's a Souls-like Zelda. Well, what if Dark Souls is a Zelda-like?
Ooh.
Zelda
I mean,
2-like.
that's a different conversation, but it honestly kind of is. But that's not a conversation for today.
No. Next time on Captain Keaton. No. All right, so final thoughts. Zelda 2. We've talked about it, talked about bringing it back. Is there an audience for it today compared to the rest of the series? What are your thoughts finally when it comes to this title?
I love Zelda 2. It's a game that I've learned to greatly appreciate throughout my life. And it always stands with me as one of my favorite Nintendo games. I think it's also very indicative of a different time for the company. Because Nintendo has like eras. You can kind of play a certain Nintendo games that feel like an era of the company, and this feels like a different era for the company that we haven't seen since. And I appreciate Zelda, and I think a lot of the things I appreciate in Zelda titles stem from this game. And it's a game that, no matter how old I get, whenever I think back on the NES library, it's probably going to be in my top 5. So it's a game that I'll always have fun returning to.
Beautiful. I have a bonus question for you.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard it yet. Do you know it?
No. No, I have the questions here. It just says bonus question.
Okay. Well, Mr. Alex of Turbo Zone, you, sir, are an NPC in Zelda 2. Where do you appear in the game, or where would you appear in the game, and what would you say to Link with your singular text box?
I can't be I am error, right? Because that's the best one.
If you're gonna be error, you gotta reappear or have a different box of text.
I have a love for the broken NES English translations. And they're such a fun inclusion that, like, even if they did remake it, I would love to keep some of those like error. They actually included him in Hyrule Warriors Legends on 3DS. And part of Linkle's story, you see error in the background as like one of the characters. So like error is real, guys. But one of my other favorite NES games, Faxanadu 2, which was inspired by Zelda 2, has one of the single funniest pieces of NES dialogue I've ever heard. It's the meteor meditate on the Tower of Suffer. That's what the guy says. He just says the meteor meditate on the Tower of Suffer, and it's like, what are you talking about? I was so like, that's what I want. I want to say something like that. I want to say like the bomb in the ravine is over the moon, and be like, what are you trying to convey to me right now?
Is it a
and
tip?
I would just be in a basement. I'd be like where the little wizard guys are. Yeah, I'd be where the wizard guys are in the basement, and you go down to this basement just for me to tell you the stupidest shit.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Alex of Turbo Zone, aka Old Man Error of the Basement, for the bomb in the ravine. What was it? The bomb in the ravine.
The bomb in the ravine is over the moon.
Is over the moon. Do with that what you will, ladies and gentlemen. But go ahead, check out Alex of Turbo Zone. Subscribe.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here on Captain Keaton. Did I do it right?
It was wonderful. I loved it. I would listen to that again.
Well, luckily you can.